Welcome everyone to this information session. The session will be run by Brian McLean, Chair of Finance. Please remember that this is just an information session and we are not looking for opinions today. There will be time for questions regarding the information only at the end of the presentation. Please hold your questions until then. Thank you.
Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah, sounds good? Okay. Well, as Barney mentioned, I'm Brian McLean, Chair of the Finance Committee here at Eden. And for those of you online, welcome to this presentation. For those of you here, thanks for staying. It's a very important subject I'm going to be covering today. And it is about a unique opportunity for Eden. So the next slide, I should be able to move. Pretty good technology, right? So before we begin, I'd like to have you join me in this prayer because this is a very important session. So let's repeat this together. Heavenly Father, as we gather together today, we seek your divine guidance in all that we do. We come before you today, trusting in your wisdom and guidance for every step we take. Lord, we ask that you direct our thoughts, our words, and our actions. Show us the path that aligns with your will and give us the discernment to know what is right. Next slide, Lorna. There we go. We know that without you, we can do nothing, so we humbly rely on your guidance in every decision we make. Let this be our prayer today, that you would instruct and counsel us, leading us toward the best outcomes according to your plans. So we're asking God to help us make decisions that we're going to be faced with over the next little while with regards to our finances here at Eden. So the objectives of my presentation are, first of all, I want to, whoops, how do we get too far ahead? I wanted Eden's financial history, and then where we are today. We'll give you a quick, and I want to talk about a few previous projects here at Eden. And finally, I'll spend most of the time talking about an opportunity that's available here at Eden. Lorna, I think you're going to have to move the slides. So, the financial history is kind of summarized here. Just taking a few highlights. Some of you will remember when we had 2 full-time ministers here at Eden, along with a youth minister part-time, and we had 2 worship services each Sunday. That's quite a difference from where we are now. We employed a full-time office administrator, a full-time property manager, and part-time property and music staff. So lots of people on staff. We had the youth filling these steps here. You remember with great enthusiasm about how great it was to have these steps full, and people yearn for those kinds of days again. But that's not the reality of today. We don't have a whole lot of young families like we had in those days. Our congregation at that time and the congregation givings were much higher than today. The finances were managed with a combination of congregational givings and rental incomes. So we fast forward from those days back to 2018, just before COVID. Our congregational givings were $206,782. Now those are givings that we're talking about through PAR, envelopes, Lenten offerings, special Christmas offerings, and those kinds of special gifts that were given. We're not talking about designated givings. We're not talking about rentals. We're not talking about those kind of really special things. This is just the normal monies that were donated by the congregation for the operations of the church. And that's really what the finance department is managing, not the trustees' funds. It's the operations to pay the bills. In 2024, this year, we're forecasting that number is going to be 193,000. So you can imagine now, in 6 years, from 2018 to now, the numbers have gone down. And what's happened with expenses? What expenses do you know that have gone down? You know, the power's gone up, the water's gone up, heating, cleaning the parking lots, salaries, every kind of expense that you can imagine has gone up at the church the same way that it has here in your own homes. So that's kind of the situation we're dealing with from a historical perspective. So where are we today? Our congregation has become smaller, and the average age is higher. I don't know about you folks, but I'm older than I was a few years ago. The congregation's givings, as I mentioned, has decreased, and the trend is showing a continuous decrease. And it's not just at Eden. It's right across the United Church, and I think most churches, donations are down. And typically in times of economic difficulty, like we are here in the country, that's one of the first things to be decreased, is people have to cut back on somewhere, and donations to charities become one of the first casualties. We need to manage our expenses, but with an aging building and its equipment, it's increasingly more difficult. And just last week, for example, the air conditioner that supplies cooling to this room has died, and we're trying to figure out whether it's worth fixing it or whether we're going to need a new one next year. We're okay for the winter because it's going to be not need for air conditioning for the next few months. But that's the kind of thing we're dealing with all the time. We're not able to pay for adequate staff and must continue to rely on volunteers to pick up the extra load. And an example of that is when we were doing the budget last fall for this year, we said we got to find ways to cut costs to maintain the exterior of the building. And we said, okay, let's find a way to cut the grass and keep the bushes trimmed and take care of the weeds and so forth using volunteers from the church here. And we cut out the contractor who used to do that work for us. We had a summer student that was provided by a grant, and along with a bunch of volunteers, we cut the grass and we kept it looking good this summer. Most people wouldn't even know there was a difference, but there's a savings of a cost saving, an example of cost savings, but that's the kind of thing we had to do even to get the numbers down to an even more realistic number. So our budget for 24 includes a deficit of $42,207, including $10,000 provision for capital reserve. Now, that's a number that should not be a surprise to anybody here, because if you were here when you approved the budget in January, that's the number that we projected. And we said that's the best we could do in terms of cutting costs and knowing what the reality was going to be as far as revenue from rentals and congregational givings. And the question came up from one of the congregation members, how long can we continue to do this, to have a deficit like that? And the answer I gave, and it's still valid, is that based on that level of deficit, our operating reserves will be depleted within 3 years. That's kind of how fast we're going through our money. And the only reason we have that amount of money is because we still have some saved from the COVID money that was provided by the government during those times. So, this is just reminding you of what we told you 7 or 8 months ago. This is a serious situation that we're dealing with. Lorna? So, where are we so far this year? At the end of August, these are just the highlights. I'm not going into a great amount of detail. The main message is that the congregational donations are $9,700 below budget and $9,200 below last year. So that's what I'm telling you. The trend is continuing to go the wrong direction. The rental revenue, thank goodness, is $9,900 above budget. So we've done a great job of increasing the rental revenues, and we're $3,500 above last year. So that's positive news, and that kind of offsets some of the congregational donation drop. The expenses, we've maintained them down about $4,100 below budget and $5,200 below last year. And the main reason for that is that we've had a very good spring in terms of snow. Didn't have a whole lot of snow to remove. And even more importantly, it wasn't a lot of money had to be spent for salt. That's one of the biggest expenses you can imagine. And of course, that's very hard to forecast. We don't know what the salt situation is going to be. Year to date, on the bottom line here, is that we're a deficit of $10,571, which is roughly the same as this time last year. So we're treading water in terms of last year, but still we're $10,000 deficit at the end of August. Lorna? Now, the forecast then for the end of the year, what do we think? And this is working with our treasurer and the rest of our finance team. We've come up with these numbers that realistically we think are going to be there. The congregational donations, as I mentioned earlier, we think it's going to be 193,000. And that includes the bump that we normally get in December. I've always said to you how many times I've done this, we need to have at least 2 Decembers every year. Anyway, including what we think would be a bump in December, about 193,000 would be the congregational givings. The rental revenue, continuing on at its current pace of 234,000, and expenses of 459. So at this point, we're forecasting a deficit of about 32,000. So we're at 10,000 now, and we think with the expenses and so forth, we'll be at 32. Now, that's including the 10,000 that we've set aside for a capital reserve, which we said we need to do because we know that there's always going to be more expenses than we can even think about for capital reserve. But the good news is that's not 42 like we originally forecast at the beginning of the year. So we're kind of improving a bit, but still that's a pretty scary number when you think of where we'd be at year end. Next. So, what's the outlook for the future? This is what we see. The congregational givings currently do not meet the church's financial needs or even cover staff payroll and benefits. Rental income is critical, but there's only so many times you can rent the space. You know, you can't rent the same space twice in the same day. And we also have already situations where, you know, groups within the church want to have a meeting, but there's no space because everything has been rented out. You really have to book far ahead if you want to get a reserved spot in the narthex or some of the meeting rooms, or even the sanctuary here. So there's a limit to how much rental income you can expect. Volunteers are at capacity. You know, we're always concerned about volunteer burnout because there's only a few people doing wearing many hats and doing a lot of the work. So you can only rely on volunteers to cover so much, and I think we're nearly at that capacity. So we have to find fresh, innovative strategies to maintain the church's ongoing presence and engagement within the community. I was encouraged at the electronics recycling event last week where so many people said, you know, just coming in, dropping off their electronics, they say, you guys do great work here. They know Eden. Even though they don't come, they know what Eden does, what it represents in the community, and that's always nice to hear that happening. So, with Eden's basic operating costs steadily increasing, building requiring costly repairs and upgrades, and donations going in the wrong direction because of demographics within our congregation. You know, even when we do get some new families come in, it's always wonderful to see that, but you know, many new families moving into this area are mortgaged right up to here. So they don't have a whole lot of money to donate to Eden or other charities. So that's the reality of the environment we're living in. So let's move then to this discussion about the opportunity that's available to us. First of all, I want to explain what is OLG and OCGA. Those are terms that most people don't know about, so I'm going to try to explain that. So what it is a partnership between the Ontario Lottery and Gaming Corporation, that's OLG, the Ontario Charitable Gaming Association, that's OCGA, some private sector operators, charitable organizations, and municipalities. All of those people together, or those groups together, form this partnership, and everybody has a stake to play in it. The mission of this group is that through charity volunteers to provide stable, direct funding for participating organizations that are dedicated to enhancing the lives of Ontario individuals. Here's a number that might be staggering for you. Last year, $80 million was generated for approximately 2,300 charitable organizations participating in Ontario. And this organization is seeking more charitable groups that can be supported. And you're going to see later on the reason for that is that their mandate includes that they have to distribute 24% of the revenue within the community to support Ontario individuals in different formats. So they're looking for more groups that will be able to participate in this. Lorna? The charitable organization has to provide a direct benefit to Ontario residents, which are consistent with the organization's mandate. In other words, it's not just available to anybody. There's a whole criteria that you have to follow and be available to do in order to qualify for this. And fortunately, Eden United Church qualifies under a section called the Advancement of Religion. So that's one of the things that they're prepared to support. So we qualify under that category. Next. So what's the opportunity then that we have available to us? We can apply to become customer service ambassadors at the local Rama Gaming Center just up here at Air Mills Parkway and Battleford. It's like 2 miles from here, less than 2 miles, very close. Each assignment would be 2 hours in length and requires 2 trained volunteers to be on site. And I liken this to Walmart greeters in the sense that you're there to greet people and be an ambassador for the organization. The role is to greet visitors, answer questions, deliver coffee to people who are operating the machines, wipe down machines, etc. So it's basically a host or hostess is the role that's involved. As I mentioned, the charity payouts are 24% of RAMA's revenue. And this is a real number from a couple of months ago. During June of 2024, the average payout for each assignment was $2,320 for a 2-hour shift. So that's the number that you got to keep in your mind. I told you earlier today that we had 5 or 6 people spending the whole day out working on the electronics recycling, gathering it all, not to mention all the time and effort that was put into planning and advertising and getting ready for that event. And we raised a whopping $1,062 for all of that effort. Now, I'm not saying we wouldn't do that because there are other benefits besides the money. It helps the environment. It means that all that equipment is not sitting in the landfill now, and there's lots of benefits from that. So we would still do that kind of thing, but this is an amazing way to augment our revenue. So at this point, we've already qualified for 2 to 3 assignments per month. That's already been confirmed with these folks. And based on that, we could potentially earn $55,000 to $85,000 a year in revenue from some volunteer hours doing this job as customer service ambassadors. And that's a real number because a couple of weeks ago, Sheena and I went to Casino Rama just to see what's involved. We talked to the people who were there doing this. That particular day it was the Rotary, Streetsville Rotary. And last year, they made $150,000 from that activity. So that's an example. I'm not suggesting we would have that many volunteers or want to put in that many hours, but this is not a dream. It's a reality. Lorna? So what's involved then in being a customer service ambassador? As I said, we have to have some volunteers to do that. So you would not, if you're a volunteer, you would not get paid, but the money that was generated would go to Eden, and that's how we would benefit as a congregation. We would need 6 to 10 volunteers to ensure coverage in terms of 2 people per shift. Now, obviously, if we had more volunteers, then it would be, shifts would be scattered, or we could take on more shifts. And some people who are familiar somewhat with this opportunity have said to me, oh, well, you're never going to get anybody to agree to that. Who's going to volunteer to do that? Well, let me tell you, I already have a whole bunch of people who have said, hey, sign me up. I'd be happy to do that. It'd be a lot easier than the kind of volunteer work that I'm doing and the small amount of money that gets raised. I've already had someone say, hey, I'm already doing it for another organization, same thing, a different organization, and I'd be happy to do a few shifts for Eden. We know that there's many local sports groups who sponsors teams that are getting money from this. So I think there'd be no problem getting volunteers to do this. So I said 2 volunteers for a 2-hour time slot. We would need to wear some kind of gaming center approved uniform. The Rotary people had their T-shirts with the Rotary on it, and there's a sign at the door saying Rotary is your local host for today. So that would be there, and they would also provide a smock if we didn't have our own shirt, but probably best to have a shirt of some sort to indicate that we're from Eden. There's online training available for the volunteers, and there's some additional paid on-site training. In other words, they would pay on-site for volunteers. It's like a shift that they would pay for, and the money then wouldn't go to the volunteer, it would go to Eden. But they're even prepared to pay to train people to do this job. So that's a positive thing. And as I said, significantly more lucrative than the typical fundraising events that we do. So that's what's involved. So the requirements then for us to get approved were this. We qualify under the advancement of religion section of participants. Activities must include an element of public instruction and the promotion of spiritual teachings. Well, what do we do here mostly? We're talking about spiritual and all the good things that people should do in their lives. The proceeds can be used to pay for utilities, staffing costs, mortgage, repair expenses, all approved by the City of Mississauga. So the idea is that we would prepare a budget of where we would spend money that we earn there. And that then would just get approved. Like you can't say, well, we're going to use this money to send a minister to Europe for a vacation. That's not part of the game. But the utilities and staffing costs and repairs and so forth, that would be fine. So then further down, you would see that there's a separate bank account required with 2 signing officers. So the money then would be electronically deposited in that account, and there'll be 2 signing officers. So it's not mingled with our normal operating bank account. And then we would have to do a monthly report to the City of Mississauga just to show them that we are spending it in the places where we said we would spend it as part of our plan. And that way everybody is aware of how it's working. So what organizations then are participating? And I went online, and you can as well when you go home. Look on the line and you're going to see 50, 60 different organizations locally that are participating and getting money for this. I picked a few here that we know. Eden Food for Change, they get money from this. The Canadian Legion, as I mentioned. The dam, we support the dam in a very small way, but they get money from this operation. Mississauga Pops, we already know about Mississauga Pops. They have practices here every week. They put on some concerts, but they're involved. The Streetsville Lions and the Streetsville Rotary are both heavily involved in this. And the idea is that they put a budget in as to how much they would like to have to augment their revenue for the operations. And if they end up getting more, then they distribute it to somewhere other charities within the area. They can't just hold on to it for next year. So those are some examples. And here's a few more. Youth Mental Health Canada, Canadian National Institute for the Blind, Utopical Centennial Choir, all kinds of different groups that you might not expect that would be involved in this kind of thing. Bridgeway Family Center, Community Services, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. They need money to run their operation. They're trying to promote no drinking and driving, but they get money from this organization to help fund that. And Assaulted Women's Helpline. So those are just some of the different groups that are already participating. So I tried to anticipate what kind of questions or objections some people might have about this, because it's a new concept for us at Eden. So, first question I thought is, what's the United Church head office have to say about this? Well, typically, years ago, United Church took a strong historic stance against gambling and supporting ministry through lottery-generated funding. That was just nothing he could even do. Like he couldn't do bingos or anything like that. In 1977, that's 47 years ago, they did a full report on gambling and lotteries. And at that time, 47 years ago, they acknowledged the dilemma of United Church of Canada groups for whom traditional sources of government funding are increasingly being replaced by funds which are lottery generated. So that's the lottery generated would be things like Ontario Trillium Fund and that kind of thing. So that's what they did back in 1977. Quite a departure from the traditional situation where they said, no, can't even think about that kind of activities. Now, some of you know or heard of Eric Matheson. He was the Chief Financial Officer at head office. He retired, I think, at the end of June. But here's a couple of comments that he made. He said, previously United Churches rejected Ontario Trillium Foundation funds, but now count on it. So things are evolving within churches, trying to survive. And then they also made a comment that a decision for a community of faith to accept proceeds from gambling for fundraising purposes is a local decision. In other words, head office doesn't get involved in approving or disapproving this. This is something that's done on a local basis. Each congregation makes the decision for itself. There are already United Church congregations across the country and in Ontario that are involved in this, and we have the opportunity, if we choose, to be involved as well. Now, some concerns that people may have is that some people are concerned that we're promoting gambling. We're not promoting gambling. The people who are going to go over to Casino Rama are going to go there whether or not Eden's involved. That's not the situation. We're not encouraging, we're not putting out a sign, hey, come on in. This is not the situation at all. And we acknowledge that for some people, gambling is an addiction. And it's the same way that some people struggle with alcohol and drugs. But those challenges exist in our society, and we're not trying to make it worse. In fact, we would like to make things better by having more money to work with and provide better support for people. The fact that OLG's willingness to allocate part of their profits to charitable organizations like us would allow us to continue the important work we've been doing in the community for years. So that's kind of the logic and some of the address the concerns that some people have. So, changing times at Eden. These are just a few highlights of major changes that have already happened here. 36 years ago, United Church of Canada did not ordain gay or lesbian ministers. That was just a no-no. That's only 36 years ago. Same-sex couples were not married here at Eden. That's changed. We did the vote and the congregation agreed to do that. Alcohol was not allowed to be sold at Eden events. Like when we have a dance here, we sell beer and wine, and that was approved by the trustees, and so that's a change from previous times. The Ontario Trillium funds were not accepted by Eden or United Churches in general. We said, no, that's got some connection with lotteries and so forth. We don't want to participate. But to survive and thrive in today's world, Eden must evolve and continue to evolve and adapt. So, what are the benefits? If the congregation approves this program, and I put an if at the beginning, substantial funds would be raised to cover expenses, like I explained before. Rather than constantly struggling for financial survival, we envision a future where we can expand our mission, both in the community and beyond. We've got the basis to do things like happened yesterday with this clothing mart, where we help people locally and beyond by sharing additional clothing that we didn't need for our sale. The top priority for any proceeds that we would get should be to ensure that Eden Congregation survives as a congregation, because that's what we're facing with now. This would enable us to continue developing the programs and services that we currently provide, and even more in the wider community. So, what would be the next process and steps in the process? So first of all, we as the Finance Committee went to Council several months ago and said, do we have your permission to investigate what's involved in this? And the Council authorized us as a committee to investigate what's involved, because there's no point in going further if we didn't have any support at all to do this. The Finance Committee prepared and submitted Ontario Gaming eligibility application to the City of Mississauga, and we were approved for licensing based on the explanation of what we would do with the money and what our position is within the community. So we've been approved for that. At the next step then is that Council is asking for input from the Eden congregation before making any decision. So no decision's been made. The first step in this Council asking for input was for me or Finance Committee to make this presentation, and it's an information session, because I'm sure there are more questions that I didn't anticipate, but we'll get to those later on. And this is the first step. The second step will be a meeting on the 20th of October. There'll be another meeting similar to this, information gathering, and a chance for you to think about questions or concerns and so forth, and we'll be discussing that at that next meeting as a discussion groups rather than just a presentation from me. So, our beliefs are rooted in core values that guide our mission. It's essential that every member of the congregation has the opportunity to reflect and pray about these matters. We encourage open dialogue. We don't want people just meeting in the parking lot and having little sessions. We want open discussion so people can hear everybody's points of view, and that's what will happen at the next meeting. This collaborative approach, we think, will strengthen our community and help us to align our efforts with the shared values. You know, some people may have come already with negative or positive views to this, but we want to make sure that the thing is fleshed out and people understand and are in a position to make a decision with council down the road. So, the decision should be considered using the following information. As an active community hub, and that's one of the things that this location is all about, it's a community hub. We've already benefited from funds donated through the Ontario Trillium Foundation, generated by OLG. Remember back in 2017, we got $105,000 from the Ontario Trillium Fund to renovate the parking lot. Now, the reason that they gave that money was because that parking lot is used by the food bank, daycare, the seniors building across the way, other organizations who come in here to use this facility, and they said, hey, that's a benefit to the community. So they granted us that money. If we just said, hey, we're Eden United Church and we'd like some money, they'd say no, because every church is going to do that. You have to have a compelling reason for them to say that this is helping the community. The elevator from the basement, in 2002, $20,000, and again, that's helping the food bank, which helps all kinds of people around the area. Just last year, we got $144,900 from Trillium Foundation for roof repairs out in the narthex. And you say, well, why would they do that? Well, we explained to them that that narthex is used by tons of people year-round. Almost every day there's some kind of a group in here using that facility, and it's a community hub, and they said, yes, we'll fund that. So those are 3 examples where we've already participated with the Ontario Trillium Foundation. Just before Christmas last year, we accepted $5,000 from the Mississauga Pops concert band, and that's funds that were generated at Casino Rama. I told you earlier that they already are participating over there, but they had more money than they needed, and they have to distribute it somewhere within the community for the Benefit Ontario residents. And they came to us and they said, we would like to donate $5,000. What can you do with it that would help other people? We said, hey, we could use that to help fund a new electronic sign that we're planning to put out front of our building. And that then sign would be able to advertise things that are happening here for the community, and Bob's your uncle. We got $5,000, but that's money that came through Casino Rama. So, our congregation and you folks should thoroughly consider this unique fundraising opportunity. We have a chance to act on this now. Otherwise, we risk facing a very uncertain financial future as a viable congregation, in my view. Summary, we got the financial future. I'm hoping that the message was clear that we have to do something. We can't just continue because we'll be out of business in about 3 years. Traditional funding sources are not sufficient to support the mission. We've got to find other ways to continue to be the hands and feet of Christ in our community. And the opportunity to volunteer as a customer service ambassador at this Rama Gaming Center can provide additional funds to continue and even expand our mission. So, with that, next slide, I want to thank you for your time and your attention today. Hopefully, we've given you lots of things to think about. Not looking for any answers now. And, if someone has a burning question that can't wait until the 20th of October, we'll try to answer it now. But for the most part, this is just meant to be an explanation of the opportunity that's in front of us. And hopefully, you've got enough information to make a decision sometime in the future. So, that's all I have to tell you today. Marnie, do you want to I'll turn it back to you if you want to just conclude.
So if there isn't any questions, I just want to thank you, Brian, for a very thorough report. That was very good presentation. And I want to thank every one of you for coming today. At our next meeting will be on after church on October 20th. And the council asks that you prayerfully consider this matter, and then you will have an opportunity to give your opinion at the next meeting at table discussions. Okay, is that, and that's it, unless anybody has any questions. Good, and that's it. Thanks. Thank you for coming.